we have no idea what's going to happen at this summit. But what we do know is that the president goes into this summit extremely wounded.
If nothing comes of it, I don't see a collapse or even a drop in approval rating. But if there is something resolute, I do see that as momentum that he can take into the midterms.
We usually talk about that bedrock of support that Trump has, about 42% just for showing up. Well, he's not attaining that 42%.
Now, on the topic of the federalization of the police, I have to ask the question, why now?
It's another Friday, and that means it's another edition of the Zogby Report, real polling in real time. And as always, I'm John Zogby, and I'm here with my son and managing partner, Jeremy. Hey, Jer, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty well, Dad. What's going on?
So what's going on is the big summit, okay? It has, for the record, has not occurred yet. Will happen later in the day. We're talking right now about 10 a.m., and there's a lot of anticipation as to whether anything's going to be resolved, and if so, on whose behalf, if there is any kind of resolution, who wins, who loses. But for now, it's a very strange situation because one of the powers that a president has is foreign policy. Does not have to generally go before Congress, can handle issues himself, and can resolve issues and build a legacy. And this is shooting for the moon. Meaning President Trump is meeting with one of the three most powerful men in the world. He, of course, is the president of the United States. She is the president of China, but this is Vladimir Putin, and Putin is at war. But this is a troubling thing. We have no idea what's going to happen at this summit. But what we do know is that the president goes into this summit, I think, extremely wounded. We just look at our last poll that was taken in late July, and we've already discussed a lot of the results, but here are some results that we didn't talk about. We asked the American people, will your financial situation at home be better off, worse off, or the same under Trump? 37% said better off, 53% said financially they would be worse off, and 31% said much worse off under Trump. Then we asked this key question, which incidentally, I have been polling since Bill Clinton was president. Are you proud or ashamed that Donald Trump is president of the United States? Now, Clinton, W., Obama, Biden, these are the worst numbers I've ever seen. 36% are proud that Donald Trump is their president. 51% are ashamed. That includes 23% of independents who are proud that he's the president, 57% of independents who are ashamed. And so we usually talk about that bedrock of support that Trump has, about 42% just for showing up. Well, he's not attaining that 42% even. Remember, too, he was elected with over 50% of the vote just less than a year ago. It's gone. Is it gone permanently? Well, we'll find out, but it's a hell of a way to go into a summit meeting with the second or third most powerful man in the world. This is truly a wounded president of the United States. Beyond just these numbers, there's serious trouble at home. We have already mentioned that he's getting low marks, majorities who disapprove of his handling of every issue, including immigration. Secondly, we have an unprecedented situation which is causing people to scratch their heads. A strong police presence in Washington, D.C., where incidentally the federal government has control. And just this morning, we learned that the U.S. Attorney General wants to appoint, because she has been ordered to by the president, an actual police commissioner for Washington, D.C. There is a lot of pushback about that. And so this all boils down to not only a wounded president, but a very controversial wounded president. And so one has to wonder, what can he possibly do in a summit with Vladimir Putin? He's going to have to win and win big. What would even a victory look like? And how does he get home to a real mess that has been created under his watch?
Well, the president is wounded in terms of numbers, but, of course, he doesn't have to run for re-election, but at the same token, the midterms are coming up, and he wants to make sure that his party stays in power. But, really, the backdrop to all of this is intense hyperpolarization. I do believe that intense hyperpolarization would exist no matter what, although it is intensifying by some of these things that you're talking about, particularly the federalization of DC police. And what we're going to see unfold is going to be very telling. How Democrats of both the party and voters mobilize to fight that, that's something worth watching. That could get ugly. But going back to the summit, the one observation that I would make is that this is the position of strength that he's actually in. And I would say it's pretty simple that if nothing happens with the summit, I don't think that results in a collapse of further support. The issue of the war between Russia and Ukraine geopolitically is an important issue. When it comes to voters, it's not something that really stacks in the ranking of issues that drive voters to the polls. We see that in the top two question we do every month, where we ask what are the top two issues that decide how you would vote. And I've been putting the language as such, the potential for global war, and then putting in parentheses Iran, Russia, and China. And I haven't seen that go above 11 or 12%. And so that's all to say that what happens geopolitically just does not measure up to the top two gargantuan issues of inflation in the economy and immigration in the minds of voters. So I'm convinced that if this is a quote unquote nothing burger, that the president doesn't become more wounded. Why that's an advantage is because if he actually does come to some kind of resolution with Vladimir Putin, that is big. Why that would be? Because we all know with his style how he's going to boast it. Possibly he could say, I prevented World War III. He could say, look what I did. Joe Biden started the war. I finished it. I told you I was going to end the war. I did it. What does it look like? I don't know. I really don't know. What I do know is that, make no mistake about it, if you follow both sides, if you follow all sides of information on the reporting of the war in Ukraine, you come to the understanding that Vladimir Putin did not want this war. He was backed into a corner. He was forced into going into Ukraine because the Eastern Ukrainians and Russians were being bombarded by Zelensky's administration. And so it was NATO encroaching on Russia dozens of countries have been brought into NATO with military bases, with weapons defense systems, and, weaponry pointed at Russia. He was dragged into the war. He was forced into it. If the two of them can come to some kind of agreement, whether that's a partition of Ukraine so that the area acquired by Russia during this war becomes Russian, and then there's a neutral zone, or maybe Kiev goes, independent and remains Ukrainian, that is a big deal, because that essentially does calm things down geopolitically in a very scary, tense moment. So my overall point is, if nothing comes of it, I don't see a collapse or even a drop in approval rating. But if there is something resolute, I do see that as momentum that he can take to then carry forth into the midterms. Now, on the topic of the federalization of the police, I have to ask the question, why now? It's not like DC has long had problems of crime. What's really going on there? You hear both sides. You hear Hillary Clinton has said it's at all times low. Certain statistics say it's lower. Others will say go back to 2019. If you go back to 2019, it's still on the rise. I ask the question, why just now? I don't know. Of course, the immediate knee-jerk reaction in the news is because of the Doge worker who was attacked. But, is federalization, really the answer? And if it is, does it then need to be, presented as this is the solution, and then New York City and then LA? That could be very problematic for the president. And that is something that intensifies this hyperpolarization that really needs to calm down.
Okay, I think you have summarized quite well, especially the Russian point of view, which I don't think we've spent enough time understanding. It is part of the Russian psyche and bloodstream to respond to potential attacks from the West. Why? Because there have been real attacks from the West for centuries, and including the 20th century, and a real fear of NATO, expansion of NATO as an aggressive force at their door, the desire then for what used to be called cordon sanitaire, around World War I and World War II. The problem, of course, is that zone of protection that Russia has always sought comes at the expense of real people, like Poland, like Ukraine, like the Baltics, and so on, who don't favor it. And so striking a deal over Ukraine with just two people present, begs for a real problem, because Zelensky is the elected leader of Ukraine. We're not going to say whether he's a good guy or a bad guy. He's the elected leader of Ukraine, and he is not present. With that said, I guess my big question is, I don't necessarily see a bump for Donald Trump under any circumstances, but is this enough of a diversion to at least stabilize his numbers? Because we do know Congress is not in session right now. It will come in after Labor Day, and it's prepared to go full guns back on Jeffrey Epstein. Is this enough of a diversion? Both this and the talk about the federalization of policing in Washington, D.C., and I don't believe it is.
Yeah, I mean, all I can say, two things. I'll start with the most recent one, and then I'll get back to Russia. But there's all kinds of diversions going on. Of course, I have to say the diversions are going on within both parties. it's important to follow both sides to understand where all of this is going. You know, I think it's already been announced that the DOJ are going to subpoena the Clintons
Yes.
and numerous amounts of Clinton cabinet members. I'm sorry, Obama cabinet members, Holder, Loretta Lynch, and of course the intelligence community, including Comey, including Clapper. And so you have this Epstein issue, which is not just a Republican issue. It's also a very Democrat. It's not just a Republican problem. It's a Democratic problem as well. It's going to boil over into greater hyperpolarization and finger pointing. Meanwhile, the voters lose sight of the fact that the issue is important because we need to see how corrupt to the bone the Washington, D.C. establishment is on both parties. And then, of course, you know, the DNI led by Tulsi Gabbard is coming forth with this, well, we have evidence that Obama's intelligence people accepted the Russian narrative, the narrative that Russia impacted the elections and had a favorite and hacked our elections. And so all of this stuff is coming to a forefront, and it's going to be very difficult for both parties, I think, to perform well in the midterms. I think that what could happen is further exhaustion and lower turnout in general, just because the two parties are at war and they're not really getting to the heart of anything by just focusing on these issues in a hyper-partisan sense. I just will go back in response to what you said about the Russian perspective. And I think you made a pretty good attempt to understand the psychology, but we have to go further. The Rand Corporation under the Biden administration produced a paper called Overextending and Unbalancing Russia. And if you go to that paper and look at what the key objectives are, as early as 2020 or 2021, they lay out exactly what the United States starts to do to bring Russia into war. And that is to heavily arm Kiev to bombard eastern Ukraine. And if you ask the eastern Ukrainians and you ask the Russians, they'll tell you that was ethnic cleansing. And so you have to look at those two words, overextending and unbalancing, and understand that that means strategically collapsing an empire. And we're reminded when you frame it that way of what the United States under Brzezinski did to drag Russia into the Afghan war. And it was a very similar strategy. So when you understand that, you understand that the State Department, and this just isn't a Biden phenomenon, this is unfortunately a phenomenon in general, are filled with neocon hawks who, regardless of the administration, want NATO to remain supreme and want NATO to knock out any potential competition that they have, including superpowers, world powers like Russia and China. And it's a terrible thing.
I not only cannot argue with that, but let me just express a moment of pride that my son actually read a Rand Corporation paper. You're a better man than I for doing that. And I have heard of that paper, but I haven't read it. And I think you're right, actually. I also don't mean in any way whatsoever to place the Democrats on a pedestal where they don't belong. And among the things that trouble me is that, and I'll say it as bluntly as I can, that the Biden administration, Anthony Blinken in particular, are the deputy butchers of Gaza. And I will never, ever forget that. They enabled the ethnic cleansing and the genocide that's taking place there. So I will not defend, I'm a registered Democrat, but I will not defend the Democratic Party. I also cannot defend the Democratic Party for refusing to take the high ground on the issue of Texas gerrymandering by foolishly and wrongly proposing to put on the ballot an equally bad gerrymandering program in California and then probably in other states. This is not the high moral ground. This is the hyperpolarization that you're talking about. And I think I'm going to end on that note. You get the last word if you'd like.
Well, I'm just going to say that I'm looking at our timer, and we covered a tour de force of modern history and contemporary politics in about under 20 minutes. So I think that that's pretty good, and we did it civilly. And so I would just ask listeners to please share this podcast, because I don't really know of any other podcast that comes at this stuff, these complicated events from two different vantage points, but also does it with a lot of love and a lot of respect. So if you agree with that and you like it, please share it, and please write back. You can write to either myself, Jeremy at johnzogbystrategies.com, or my dad, John, at johnzogbystrategies.com. You can find us on SoundCloud, on YouTube, and you can come to our website, johnzogbystrategies.com. And if you think you know somebody who could benefit from hearing this, or even from our analytical viewpoint, please also share.
Great. Thanks. Rand Corporation, huh? Wow. Okay. Have a good week.
They probably need our services.
Yes, they do. If you're watching, have a good week.
Have a good weekend.